Now when General Motors purchases DELCO, it was with a plan to centralize the research. There are all these separate divisions, but it didn't seem to make sense to build research onto each division independently of one another, because new research developments were somehow applicable to them all. So research was going to be centralized. Durant indeed wanted to locate it in Detroit. Kettering insisted on keeping research at Dayton. And so we end up with a research enterprise located inside of GM, but physically away from the divisional production facilities. And organizationally, if you think about the organization as a bureaucratic structure, like with an organizational chart, having separate divisions, and then a leadership, an executive committee or board at the top and a president in the middle, how would you locate this new organization called DELCO? Most likely the best place to draw it is coming out of the side, sitting just below the board, just below the executive committee, just below the president, in a way above the divisions, in between the two, feeding information, feeding knowledge, feeding ideas, down into the divisions. The geography here is significant. And Kettering was made a vice president of research and gained a seat on the board of directors. Now, he's got his researchers off working with copper. Problem with copper, as you may know, is that it's soft. And so the question is, how can you build some sort of copper mechanism for dissipating heat, let us say copper fins, onto an iron electric block? How do you put together copper and iron? They spent a lot of time trying to grapple with this problem. The solution came from Charlie Lee, technician at inside of DELCO, which involved building a special electric furnace to braze the copper to the iron. Brazing becomes the means. In 1921, they have success. They have figured out a way to, with the genius that lay inside of DELCO, to braze copper fins onto engine blocks, to dissipate the heat and replace the water with this air system. And that included later, as the project developed, it included blowing air over the engine to help the process of dissipation. So research goes to work in building prototypes. The plan that develops inside of among the board is to get an engine, an air-cooled engine for Chevrolet, which is on the low end of the GM plan. And the specs basically called for an engine that was roughly 135 pounds maximum, had at least 14 horsepower at 1,000 RPM, and must cost no more than $75. One problem that turned out to be significant is that this meant that they were aiming for a car that could weigh only 1,450 pounds, which was significantly lighter, I believe, by several hundred pounds, the existing Chevrolet. So in addition to changing engines, the researchers went about the process of redesigning the frame, axles, and especially steering gears. Kettering and his researchers, the researchers in white coats, the researchers who sometimes had degrees in the sciences, the people who had the ideas, go test their engines. They take cars out in order to test them. We didn't use the Indianapolis Speedway just yet. These researchers go out on the back roads of Ohio. And as you may or may not know, roads in the United States, pretty much prior to the interstate highway system of the 1950s, were pretty much awful most of the year. So driving on back roads in Ohio was a good way to test cars to their in extreme circumstances. So they went for several weeks. They traveled around on these back roads, testing the new air-cooled engines against water-cooled vehicles and the like, feeling that that the engine was functioning pretty well. Reasonable power and reasonable performance with low maintenance and proper dissipation of heat. They completed then the specifications of the design for this engine in fall 1921, finalizing the height of the fins and the length of the fins and the spacing of the fins in order to maximize the dissipation of the heat. So from the point of view of research, everything is going wonderfully. The new ideas, the geniuses have come up with a great idea, and all that's necessary now is to just throw it over the wall.